Before I make a guide for a vehicle, I read a lot of comments, the wiki article, and most of all build up my own experience by playing it for a good number of matches. This process was never as difficult as it was with the Russian IS-1. The IS-1 is categorized as a heavy tank and some say it has a good armor, but in my opinion you can't really brawl with this tank. It has some armor to bounce a few shots, but the weak spots are just too prominent. In the end I found a way to play it successfully. Please consider that the following tips helped me to have some great matches and they may differ from other opinions. Welcome to my new video that is a guide on how I recommend to play the Russian IS-1. Before we jump into my tips, let's have a look at the advantages and disadvantages of this tank for the better understanding. The IS-1 is a Russian heavy tank at the BR 5.3. This BR is very popular and therefore you will not get many down tier matches. This heavy tank comes with sloped armor on the front plate and turret that normally should enable you to deflect some shots. But most of the guns of the other two big nations can easily penetrate your armor at one point. The lower front plate, the turret cheeks and last but not least the commander's hedge are all well-known weak spots. And even when you angle the tank, the former sloped armor under the turret gets a flat spot. It may have some armor, but I wasn't able to really brawl with it. Another disadvantage is that there are 3 out of 4 crew members in the turret. A well-placed shot with some explosive filling will send you back to the spawn screen. Again, like for most of the Russian tanks, the IS-1 has no gun depression, and you can't really go hull down. The turret rotation speed is okay but not that good, and sometimes it can get you into some dangerous situations. Now let's have a look at the advantages and start with the most important one. This tank has an amazing reverse speed of up to -17 km/h. This not only gives you the opportunity to escape out of a dangerous situation, but also the possibility to drive into the battle rear first. Doing so you only expose your turret as a weak spot to the enemy because the engine will eat all the shots that are aimed on the hull. But keep in mind that this can still be dangerous. The forward speed with up to 40 km/h is okay. Another advantage is the 85mm D5T gun. It has a fast reload of up to 7.4 seconds and comes with the BR 365A shell you can unlock. This shell has only up to 133mm of penetration, but amazing 164 grams of explosive mass. When you penetrate a hostile tank, this will most certainly be a one shot. Taking all these points into account, here are my tips on how to best play the IS-1. Tip number 1. Play as support. The IS-1 has some tricky armor and you can bounce a shot or two, especially when you side scrape and hide your lower front plate. This can be a good mechanic to deal with some close combat situations, but overall I cannot recommend to brawl in this tank. The weak spots are just too prominent and one shot in the commander's head will send you back to the spawn screen. In the few down tier matches I played this tank a bit more aggressively and it worked occasionally. But overall I recommend to play it as support, no matter if you have a down tier or up tier match. I prefer to use the mobility and flank the enemy. Doing so I can use the researchable BR 365A shell with less penetration and shoot on the side armor of the enemy. The good mobility and especially the amazing reverse speed comes in handy when you get a map where you can't flank the enemy play from the second row. Here you can use the sloped armor as advantage and the distance to the enemy will make it more difficult for them to aim on your commander's hedge. Pick your fights and attack enemies that are unaware or reloading. You can also take a few shells of the solid shot with you to deal with tougher enemies. As mentioned earlier, some players also like to use the reverse speed to drive into the battle rear first. I don't prefer that playstyle, but I use it occasionally and reverse side scrape to attack enemies in close combat situations. But I actually try to avoid these situations. Tip number 2. Peek and boom. As always for the Russian tanks, peek and boom is the preferred technique. Use a ridgeline or a rock as solid cover to protect your tank and peek out of the cover when it is safe to do so. In towns use the third person view to check where the enemy is aiming at. The powerful shell and the amazing reverse speed will do the trick. You can also side scrape and let the shot of the enemy disappear in your tracks or bounce on the rear of the tank. While the enemy is reloading you can use the reverse speed and shoot on the enemy. The same goes for reverse side scraping, but keep in mind that your turret might be exposed when your track is destroyed. Tip number 3. Relocate. The good mobility of the IS-1 gives you the possibility to relocate if needed. When you use the shell with less explosive filling, I recommend to flank and shoot on the weak side armor of the enemy. When you encounter an enemy that points its front armor towards you, back up and relocate your tank to get a chance to attack the enemy from the side. You can also fall back and wait for your team to regroup if needed. Here is an additional tip for the slow turret rotation. Since the turret rotation could be better, you can also additionally turn the whole tank to get your aim faster on the target. The gun is relatively stable and shouldn't wiggle too much while turning the whole vehicle. I hope I was able to give you some tips on how to play the IS-1, and again this is how I had some great matches. Like, subscribe and leave a comment if you want to, and check out my Discord server for more information and to connect with other players. Hope to see you in game soon.